You're listening to WPPM LP in Philadelphia. Stay tuned for the People Power Lunch Hour show. Good afternoon. I'm Vanessa Maria Graber, and I'm your host of the People Power Lunch Hour show. On today's show, we are going to be talking about organizing the Latino community ahead of the midterm elections. I'm joined by my guest, Rafael Collazo, who is the political director of the UnidosUS Political Action Fund. He also is a host of a podcast here in Philadelphia, Ray's Podcast. And we're going to talk with him and about all of his work and issues that have come up in organizing the Latinx community. Welcome to the show.
Welcome, Vanessa. And I think it's very appropriate that this is the Power Hour because a lot of times at 12 o'clock, people put on disco or freestyle with those 12 o'clock mixes to get pumped up. We're going to get people pumped up about organizing and empowering themselves.
That's right. Well, we came up with this show idea after the first election, or not the first election, but the 2016 election, where people were feeling really frustrated and wanting to do something to change the state of affairs. And we decided to do this show to offer a platform to people like yourself who can connect people locally with organizing that's happening here in our communities. And we also want to educate people about all the many different issues that affect us. And I think one of the kinds of content that we really strive for here at Philly Cam is to get people civically engaged. So thank you for joining us today.
Oh, no, I'm very excited. There's nowhere else I'd rather be because this is a very important time to have these conversations. A lot of us are feeling very beat down right now because of the current political climate. But one of the things I want to share with folks is that we've gone through worse and we've won more battles than we give ourselves credit for. So it's time to continue to stand up for ourselves and make it happen.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the organization that you're representing, which is UnidosUS, formerly the National Council of La Raza, the nation's largest Latino civil rights and advocacy organization. You do research, advocacy programs, and you have a national network of nearly 300 community-based affiliate organizations across the country, working to challenge the social, economic, and political barriers that affect Latinos in the United States. And the vision to see a strong America where economic, political, and social advancement is a reality for all Latinos, where Hispanics thrive and the community's contributions are recognized.
It's a mouthful there, Vanessa.
Yeah, talk more about that.
Yeah, so I'm actually here today formally representing our 501c4 organization, the UnidosUS Action Fund, because we're going to talk politics. But people I think are familiar with from the civil rights era, there was a movement of civil rights institutions that emerged. The Urban League, the NAACP, which predates even the civil rights era. And similarly in the Latino community, organizations sprung up like our legal groups and other civil rights organizations and the formerly the National Council of La Raza, UnidosUS, came from that movement. Many things have happened since then, of course. We've had many movements and the Latino community's evolved. So UnidosUS is now well beyond the Southwest and the more traditional Mexican-American areas. and including a very inclusive agenda, not only within the Latino community, but of collaborating with other civil rights organizations, other people of color, and other like-minded people for inclusive and fair vision for our country.
Tell us about how you decided to get involved in politics and work on things like voter registration and organizing people, because you have a history in participating in the last two elections and getting out the Latino vote.
Yeah, well, even predates that, but it really spurs from it's really a historical answer because as people know historically, and people listening to this would appreciate, sort of the 60s and sort of what we consider sort of the height of the civil rights movement. What came after that was really sort of an angrier time in minority communities, and people are probably most familiar listening to this to sort of the Black Power movement that came out of those times, and then subsequently the feminist movement. But there was also a Latino movement that emerged, particularly in sort of regional pockets. And in this case, in the East Coast and the Puerto Rican community, my parents were involved in those movements. And so through their fight to have Latinos in the 70s, which, we had a very small population, we had very little voice in really any sort of sphere in Philadelphia and other similar communities, I was birthed. And so that really inspired me to continue this work. Another family and other mentors directed me in the direction of civic engagement and empowering people through their vote and through organizing. So that's really what I've dedicated my life to. And in 2018, it's more important than ever before.
How did your organization and your organizing have to shift or evolve after the 2016 election?
Well, it really started before that, but basically that was a part of the reason that since 2007, my organization has had some form of a 501c4 organization. As we all know, nonprofit organizations are what we call their tax status a 501c3, like WPPM and PhillyCam. There are limits to the type of advocacy or the type of political election work that they can do. A nonprofit can endorse a candidate, and has to be very careful how they message around elections. So in developing our sister 501c4 organization, we have a lot more flexibility. With our C4, we can do unlimited advocacy, and we can call people out and call it how we see it. And in the case of this election cycle, we're actually endorsing and talking directly about the candidates we think would be best for our community. So doing more of that and emphasizing more of that electoral political work and the work that we do across the board has been a part of the answer, and mobilizing our community around the country, because, it doesn't feel like it, but the last 2 years could have been a lot worse, particularly on the legislative side. But we've been able to push back, whether it was trying to repeal the ACA, Affordable Care Act, or other legislative attacks in our community. We've been able to push back because our movement has collectively worked together to push back Congress and the Senate from even doing more harm to our community. So this work around advocacy and civic engagement is more important than ever, and we've been responding by developing more institutions and tools to push back on this attack on our community.
I want to talk about the 48% of people that didn't vote. What's your been experience like in engaging with people who might feel marginalized or not represented within the political space? What's the strategy to sort of get them mobilized and activated?
It's wow. That's a whole college seminar. I think there's a couple things. One is on a statistical basis, and I'll just talk about the Latino community for a second. That's on a statistical basis, the biggest challenge we have is that approximately half of our community nationally, and probably in a community like Philadelphia may even be larger, but more or less about half of our community who's eligible to even register to vote isn't even registered. So we're having a challenge even getting people into the game to play, if that makes sense. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Particularly a state like Pennsylvania is very repressive when it comes to voting rights. And so it's, even an educated person or someone that's fairly aware, if I told you today, right now, go find somewhere to register to vote, it might take you a minute to figure it out. So we have to develop more access to people registering to vote. And then to your second point, so once we get people registered, why do we not get them more involved? It is an absolute challenge. We're knocking on doors as we speak in Philadelphia, and a lot of people do feel that sense of hopelessness. Obama didn't fix it. No other elected official that we found has fixed it. Now it's getting worse because of this guy, this current president. So to give someone that answer that lives in 3rd and Indiana, that's a single mom that's struggling just to feed their kids and get to the second job on the weekends and find a babysitter while they have to take care of their mom who has a medical appointment, to tell them that they somehow have some power to make that difference in the ballot box is a challenge. So that level of education, but most importantly, empowering people to feel like they can help lead us out of this situation beyond voting is going to be the tool to ultimately elevate our communities, that we've already seen that happening in various movements around the country.
What about millennial voters? A new study showed that millennials were driving the increase in Latino voters in the United States. How are we organizing and engaging with them?
Millennials are our last hope, frankly. If I guess I'm a Gen Xer, I guess. So there was the baby boomers, which because of Vietnam and there's lots of World War II, and there's lots of historical reasons why that our parents' generation was big, and then our generation was a little smaller now for other reasons, a large part because of Latino and immigration and the diversity of our country. The millennial generation is a very large group of people. So hypothetically, they could make up half the electorate in the country if we fully engage them. I think the first thing is that we have to empower millennials to organize themselves. There's only so much a Gen Xer or someone even older than me can do as it relates to relating to the issues that they care about. Oftentimes, organizers and activists of all generations think the issues they care about, and the fact as political news junkies and people that think about these things in more ideological terms, we have to speak about the issues in a way that people can relate to. We've literally knocked on probably about 10,000, close to 10,000 doors in the last month in North Philadelphia. And do people talk about how Trump's a jerk? And do people talk about sort of the politics from a national perspective? Or do they even talk about issues like Puerto Rico or immigration? They do. But the vast majority of them, regardless of their generation, but particularly young people, talk about it in very personal, local terms. I'm going to get in tremendous student loan debt if I want to go to college. The job market, even as a college graduate, is limited. I'm trying to go back to school, but I'm working and I need daycare assistance. It's very, there's the knucklehead across the street won't clean his front porch, and it's causing environmental issues on the block. So how to the extent we can organize millennials to empower them with these tools to mobilize people around the issues they care about is that's how successful we're going to be in mobilizing millennials, not only to register to vote, but to organize and lead us into the future.
What drives your passion for this work? Because you get like really excited.
I'm very excited.
And when I invited you, you were like, yes, and you
Yeah.
even took it upon yourself to start doing your own podcast, making your own media about that.
That's right.
What's driving that?
5.5 years, by the way. I'm an OG in podcasting. Podcasting's like, chic now. I was doing it when, let me tell you something, Vanessa, and I'm so glad I got to meet you as a fellow radio nerd, is that when I started podcasting, like I didn't know another podcaster in person, and none of my friends listened to them. So it was a very lonely existence for a while, but now it's very chic. But going back to your initial question, my passion for it came out of anger because I grew up across the street from Porky's Point at 5th Street, where Rising Sun meets 5th Street, basically 5th and Pike, that tri-section. And I was very angry because if people remember, you're not old enough to remember this, Vanessa, but some of your listeners are. In the early 80s, that's when basically the Reagan administration turned on the spigot and flooded the cocaine market in North Philadelphia and other minority communities around the country, which started this wave of mass incarceration. And we were getting national press for Ethan Butler, if people remember that being the big drug quarter in America for a while. And the Badlands. And people were calling my community bad when my friends, my neighbors, everyone I knew, I went to church with, I went to school with, my relatives from the Bronx, my relatives of Puerto Rico, my friends, my dad's African-American buddies, our Latino buddies, everybody was cool. And everybody was actually pretty wonderful and talented and moral and family-oriented and smart and attractive. And so I saw how we were being portrayed, and that really angered me. And a lot of our kids in our community feel that. And so, unfortunately, they don't have the guidance or the support to take that into positive vehicles. But I was, because of my parents and the family and the support that I had. So, it's like I won a lottery ticket, Vanessa. I grew up at 5th and Pike. I got Catholic school education. I went to an Ivy League school. As a Latino male, as a Puerto Rican male, if you look at my economic and education trajectory, it's almost like I won the lottery. And I've always felt there was a reason for that. And I would feel selfish if I took my fancy degree, which I can't read because it's in Latin, and went to Wall Street or did something that was very personally selfish, money. If I didn't give back, because there's so many people that I grew up with that were a lot smarter than me, that didn't have nearly the opportunities. So I feel that responsibility, and I feel that responsibility not only as a Latino and a Puerto Rican, but as a Philadelphian, because Philly did so much for me and my family, and we got to represent.
Agreed. If you're just tuning in or watching, this is the People Power Lunch Hour show on Philly Cam TV and WPPM Community Radio. I'm your host, Vanessa Maria Graber. You just heard Rafael Rey Collazo, who's the political director of UnidosUS Action Fund. We're talking about organizing the Latino community here in Philadelphia and all over the U.S. ahead of the midterm elections. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll talk more with Ray about the regional differences among Latinos here in the U.S.
Orale.
and local organizing that's happening here in Philly. Stay tuned. Thanks for watching and listening.
How long is the break?
Our November general election is coming up fast. This year, Pennsylvania voters will choose candidates for governor, lieutenant governor, both houses of U.S. Congress, and both houses of the Pennsylvania General Assembly. Try using websites such as Committee of 70 at 70.org or Ballotpedia at ballotpedia.org for more information about the election and your candidates. Voting for the general election will take place November 6, 2018. Polling places will be open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. You can check your voter registration and locate your polling place by calling Philadelphia Voter Registration Office at 215-686-1590, or you can check online by visiting pavoterservices.pa.gov.
Welcome back to the People Power Lunch Hour show. I'm your host, Vanessa Maria Graber. Today, we are speaking with Rafael Rey Collazo, who's the political director for UnidosUS Action Fund. And this month's theme for the People Power Lunch Hour, of course, voting and elections. How could we not talk about that this October ahead of the very important 2018 midterm elections? Ray is with the UnidosUS Action Fund, and his work entails organizing the Latino community, educating them, doing advocacy work, etc., many, many other things. I want to talk about the word Latinos or Latinx, as a lot of other people as well use that terminology. It encompasses a lot of different kinds of people. We're often united in our language and our shared values. Many Latinos are also Christian. So what are some of the commonalities and the differences that you're seeing as you travel across the U.S. and see the diverse communities that identify as Latino?
Well, let me tell you a quick story. So in 2008, I was running probably at that cycle the largest nonpartisan Latino voter registration mobilization project in the country. So Vanessa, I had 13 offices in 7 states. And so I felt like an actor in some sense, or a chameleon, because I'd have to, in every Latino community I went to, it was a different persona. So I'd go to the Southwest, and it was like old school Mexican Americans, very English speaking, very, traditional Southwest culture. I'd go to Orlando, it was like going to Puerto Rico. I'd go to Miami, it was like going to Cuba. I had a lot of Dominican staff in Reading, Pennsylvania. So there's a lot of diversity within our community. And so I find that, there's just a lot more that brings us together. If you sort of, from a polling perspective and a survey perspective, from an issue perspective, we're pretty similar across the board. There aren't huge differences. Puerto Ricans are actually probably as progressive, if not more progressive, in immigration issues as other communities. The Mexican American and non-Puerto Rican Latino community have been very strong working with us as it relates to the issues around Puerto Rico. So, we don't really find large variances from an issue perspective. What you do find is that, there's different cultures and different cultural dynamics. There's literally different languages people are speaking. And they do come from politics from a different orientation. So, if you came here as a political refugee fleeing a regime that was either right wing or left wing, you have a certain perspective. If you're a Puerto Rican that came here because of post Maria the hurricane. You obviously have another different perspective. But what I have found is that when we talk about the issues that people care about, for the most part, we can kind of bridge those gaps, and people appreciate the fact that, I'll tell you a funny story. In 2008, I had to set up a very quick campaign operation in Pueblo, Colorado. And for 4 days, I became the Puerto Rican guy that was offering jobs because there weren't many Puerto Ricans, and I was offering canvassing jobs. And so, but that was one of the greatest experiences of my life, because this community, which I would have probably never have gone to, which it felt like home. A lot of the same dynamics, like I grew up in North Philly, a lot of the same values, a lot of the same challenges, and a lot of the same spirit, even though it's a very different community from a cultural perspective. So I think that the more we sort of extend our hand and are willing to learn more about these other cultures and understand, a lot of times, not so much anymore, but in the past, Cuban Americans, for example, were often criticized by other Latino groups. They're Republicans, they're sellouts. And again, understanding sort of the culture of, how Cubans came to this country and the refugee status, and how Reagan did a lot for them in those years, you sort of begin to understand sort of where they're coming from. We have conversations about the issues. There's a lot more commonalities, and that community is becoming much more progressive as the millennial Cuban American population grows up.
I find that one thing that brings us together, and we find a lot of commonalities or common experiences, is our media consumption of Latino media. There's not a lot of choices.
Yeah.
And no matter what country you're from, everybody's watched Sábado Gigante, for example. We've seen a Chavo de Ocho, Cristina, all of these things. Can you talk more about just Latinos in the media? Because that's what we're doing, right? We're we're carving out a space for our voice in a landscape that's not very diverse when it comes to representation of Latinos.
Well, it's so interesting because, and this is a big part of it, Vanessa, this platform and your folks you're collaborating with here, is that it's moving so fast, very few of us really understand it. So when I bring up, to other people, when they talk about the Latino millennial piece, right, and say, well, I think it's important that we start engaging, the people that millennial Latinos look up to, and very few of them are the people that you would think of. So if anyone listening to this knows who Lily Pons is, or LaJuan James, or other sort of YouTube, social media stars that have a consciousness, that aren't Hollywood celebrities, that are not on Spanish language television, those are some of the new emerging leaders that are using their own platforms, that are not part of a corporate media structure, that are really directly relating to particularly the millennial Latino generation. And so, if we don't understand that, we have no chance as organizers to engage people. And because of the modern technology, and that's why I started podcasting, because I didn't see that voice, not so much my voice, that's part of it, but the voice of my generation of activists, friends, artists. I just interviewed a friend of mine that just came out with her book, which would be great to have on your show. Her novel about Latinas and love, and a series of essays she did about the Puerto Rican diaspora, and many of these issues around love and identity. But there's just so much talent and so many voices have to be heard. So we have to create our own space. So whether it's an Instagram page, a podcast, Philly Cam, we just have to use our own space. One of the amazing stories about the Latino media is that Univision is literally dying because novelas, that market is becoming a much more smaller, and Latinos are becoming more understanding that they have choices in multiple languages.
And I think a higher standard has been set by
No question.
Platforms such as Netflix.
Absolutely.
Where we're seeing Spanish media content from all over the globe. And I think a lot of people have wondered, well, why aren't we producing stuff like this in our country?
And I think, and it goes beyond the Latino community, I think one of the reasons that podcasting and forums like this have become much more popular is that mainstream media is very dumbed down. So it's, and I'm a big sports guy, but you turn on sports radio or ESPN, it's one guy over here, and a pretty girl in the middle, sort of debate, being the arbiter. And it's just yelling at each other from these totally different perspectives, and it's totally fake, and it turns people off. So they've kind of gone underground, if you will, for an intelligent conversation about whatever they are into. And I think we're finding that that's going to be more and more the mainstream, and where people are going to get their information increasingly.
Yeah, and as a woman, I often feel the Latinas are sexualized so much, in the novelas and even in the news shows. It's hard to kind of pay attention and learn from that when you're distracted by, the over objectification of women.
That's right.
And so that's partially why I'm drawn to radio, right? Because it's our voice. I mean, we're on TV as
You know
well
what's
today,
interesting,
but
Vanessa? It's interesting you say that because, and when I not only do I consider myself a very proud podcaster, but I'm like a podcast evangelizer, if that's a proper word. I'm always telling people, and literally every professional, or not professional, but every Latina that has a message, I beg them to podcast, and they tell me the same thing. They either say, on some level, they don't feel like their voice sounds good, like they have this complejo about their voice, or on the flip side, they're an attractive woman, and they would like the idea of doing it so people don't judge them for their looks.
yes.
So it's really because they were like, I don't want people to judge me for my physical appearance. I have a voice to say, so this can be an attractive medium in that way. But I find that so interesting because even professional women, even people that you would say have on some level achieved some status in this society, feel this daily attack or lack of voice. So you can imagine an undocumented woman who's cleaning the hotel across the street, or a gentleman who's cleaning the dishes in your local restaurant, or just someone that works in retail, that's working poor, just struggling to survive, not making a living wage. They don't have a voice. So imagine their challenges finding their voice in our society. So these mediums are really important.
Well, I'm trying to draw the connections between being civically engaged, having a voice, interacting, sharing information. I think community media is essential to that. And one of the primary reasons I was drawn to using media as a tool for social justice and representing Latinos. And so I'm glad so many more people are coming to Philly Cam and seeing what we're into, because I think it's a really important time to talk about these things and to have a forum where we can sort of be unfiltered and really speak to the needs in our community.
And it's also, Vanessa, very cultural, because even in the modern day, connecting from a messaging perspective, connecting with Latinos, regardless of their language preference, via radio, or now increasingly in podcasting, and especially now in live stream music options, is still a very powerful connection to us. I mean, it's our thing. We like to talk. We like to listen to music. We like to, use these platforms. So it's also very a connection culturally that still resonates with our generation.
Yeah, well, that's one of the beauties of community radio, not to be so like radio centric, but cable and internet access is still a really big barrier, especially for Latinos here in Philadelphia that are experiencing poverty. It's one of the reasons why we decided to add radio to Philly Cam's platforms, is because it's still the only free medium out there that doesn't require a subscription. And so, again, when we talk about knowing the issues, being civically engaged, access to information is really important part of that, right? And so if we can offer information to our community that they could consume for free without having to subscribe or buy a really expensive receiver, then hopefully there will be more informed, active citizens, right?
So I'll chime in with your radio evangelizing. That the other thing, and this is one of the reasons podcasting has become so much more popular, is that audio is the only medium you can consume while doing something else. So you can be on
like cleaning the house on Saturday.
You can be cleaning the house. You can be, my wife thinks I should do more of that, but yes, clean the house. Literally anything, in the shower, commuting, which oftentimes people listen to us.
Or curling your hair before the show.
Curling your hair, or consuming another media. So you could be, have the TV in the background, or, and listening to a podcast or a radio. So it's very accessible in that way.
Agreed. If you're just tuning in or watching Philly Cam TV and WPPM Community Radio, you've been hearing the voice of Rafael Collazo, who is the political director of UnidosUS Action Fund. We're talking about organizing the Latino community and all the issues and challenges and fun things about that work. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll have more People Power Lunch Hour. Thanks for watching and listening. We'll be right back.
Are you a registered voter? Do you know how to check? To confirm your voter registration status, visit pavoterservices.pa.gov or call the Philadelphia Voter Registration Office at 215-686 1590. If you find you are no longer registered, you will need to register to vote again as soon as possible. If you know in advance that you will not be able to make it to a polling location on Election Day, you may want to acquire an absentee ballot. You may be eligible for an absentee ballot if you are incarcerated, institutionalized, ill, physically disabled, away from your municipality, or observing a religious holiday. You can download the application online from philadelphiavotes.com or have the application mailed to you. The last day to apply is Tuesday, October 30th. Completed absentee ballots should be mailed or delivered to City Hall no later than 5 p.m. on Tuesday, November 2nd.
Welcome back to the People Power Lunch Hour Show. I'm your host, Vanessa Maria Graber, and we're here at Philly Cam Studios, broadcasting live on WPPM 106.5 FM, our community radio station, and also on our public access television channels on Comcast and Verizon. I'm your host, Vanessa, and I am joined by Rafael Collazo, who is the political director of UnidosUS Action Fund. He's also a local podcaster and media maker, and we've been talking about organizing the Latino community ahead of the upcoming midterm elections. I want to talk about demands because in order to have an effective social movement, you have to be asking for something. And you spoke earlier to people talking about politics in the way of identifying what their needs are. I would like for you to talk more about that. What are the things that Latinos want in terms of social change? How can they make their quality of life better? What are the things that people are advocating for legislatively?
You know, it's interesting. So when we poll Latinos, and it comes up again and again and again and again, is that very much when we think about the mainstream, when we think about in the Latino community, immigration, and then I think more recently in Puerto Rico, rarely do they, sometimes, do they come up as sort of like the number one issue. They're sort of like litmus test issues and are important. But day to day, oftentimes people come let us know that the two sort of general issues come up as the dominant forces. One is healthcare. And so if we think about that from an economic lens or a health lens or a senior lens or a millennial lens, one way or another, healthcare is a very dominant issue in our community. And part of that's because of our cultural value of family, right? So many of us are caregivers. Many of us are thinking about, you know, how to take care of the different generations within our own household. And then the other one is obviously some level of economic empowerment, economic development, which even has a healthcare lens. So if you have before the Affordable Care Act, if you had a pre-existing condition, that would not only affect your health, but that would severely impact your economic viability. And so, we don't have a lack of people that want to work in our community, but we are definitely looking for opportunities not only to have a living wage, and so the minimum wage movement and other similar movements can be very impactful in our community and resonate very strongly, but also movements like the movement to minimize the strain on student loans. You know, there's a lot of people in our community. We have enough challenges accessing higher education, but to have them make the decision of encouraging your child to put on $200,000-$300,000 of student debt by their early 20s or not get higher education, those are two tough options. And so we have to, again, connect with people where they're at and understand that as activists, we have to really speak to these issues in very more practical terms than sometimes we do.
I wanted to talk about hard work because you said, people are willing to work, because that's actually a good segue to some Pew Research findings, which if you are looking at different elements of the American population, the Pew Center for Research is a really good source.
They're locals too.
Yes. But in a recent study, they found that Latinos are significantly more likely than the general U.S. public to believe in core parts of the American dream, that hard work will pay off and that each successive generation is better off than the one before it. And they go on to say, yet many Hispanics see the American dream as hard to reach, and belief in it declines as immigrant roots grow distant, according to the newly released results from a Pew Center research study of adults. So it said that more than 3/4 of Latinos said at the time that most people can get ahead with hard work, um, and that Hispanic similar shares expected their standard of living to be better than that of their parents, and they expected their children to be better off than themselves. Can you talk more about achieving the American dream?
Yeah, it's interesting. So uh, that is correct. When Latinos have been polled, this has been for over a decade now. We tend to be more optimistic than the general population. I think some of that probably comes from us being sort of a younger a group. You tend to, when you're younger, you tend to be a little more idealistic. I think part of that comes from our, in many pockets of our community, a more recent immigrant family. So you came here with a dream, and you were able to access it, and you're seeing some of the advances in your initial stages and as generations more recently progress. But we are seeing a dampering of that, as you alluded to, and I think that's sort of pretty similar to Americans across the board. A growing trend is that Americans don't feel that the next generation is going to do better because of these economic forces we've been talking about. And that's part of the, whether it's, the lack of wage growth and this growing gap between the haves and the have-nots, income inequality. And so a lot of those issues go back to that dynamic. People saying, well, even if I get my kid educated, they're going to be so behind the eight ball economically because of the student debt. Then, are we really progressing? And so that, and the combination of that and the lack of wage growth and the minimum wage being immorally low in our country contributes to that sense of anxiety.
Yeah, I think in my own organizing work, I've heard two things come up that pretty much are catch-all for everything that's going on. One is income inequality, right? People know and understand that there's this concept of a living wage, and also the ability of people to be able to save money and own property. Like, that's pretty universal
Right.
in terms of people knowing that political change needs to happen in order to get income equality. And then the second thing that's sort of the inverse of that is the problem of money in politics, and how Citizens United has really affected the elections in terms of corporations' ability to give unlimited resources to action funds and candidates, etc. Are these things also coming up in your conversations with people? And also, I guess, in the context of capitalism, right? Are people aware of these relationships?
To the second one, sort of money in politics, that tends to be, it doesn't most of us don't really speak of it in those terms. They just kind of see it as a general dishonesty and distrust of the political system and the political process.
Or maybe just like corruption.
Yeah,
right?
corruption. They're paid off. They may not understand the Citizens United piece, which again was a historical blow to our democracy and the activist class. We speak about it that way. We talk about it that way. When you knock on a door in Third Indiana, they're talking about their cousin that's on opioids, and they're worried about them. It's becoming a personal drain on their family. It's becoming an economic drain on their family. It's becoming a community issue because now their cousin's committing crimes, so they can't find them. It's impacting how they can go to work. It's impacting how their neighbors perceive them. And so, again, oftentimes we have to speak about these issues in more sort of in terms that people sort of can relate to on a day-to-day basis. But you're absolutely correct. People know that Dunkin' Donuts doesn't pay the bills. People know that, someone with a degree, from a degree from a four-year institution shouldn't feel forced to work at Starbucks or a mall job. Not that there's anything wrong with those jobs, but they're overqualified for those jobs. So where are the economic opportunities for them, especially now when they've been saddled with this humongous debt to start their professional career? So again, the more we talk about it in terms that people understand, then that you've gotten their attention, you're listening to them. The question then is, how do we then able to organize ourselves in ways and take steps so people understand they can make a difference in those situations, because they understand the issues. They understand who the bad guys are. They generally know ideologically the direction they want this country to go. But a lot of people just don't feel they can make a difference. So they may think you can make a difference. I can make a difference. Well, this guy talked a lot, he's got a nice job. He can make a difference. But how do I make a difference? And so that's our challenge. And we find examples of this all the time. We're able to empower people. So there's a lot of hope. But at the same time, we can't sit here and say, well, these people in the hood don't vote. They don't get involved. They don't care. They care about all kinds of things. but we have to empower them so they can have their voice, feel that this process will make a difference in their lives.
Yeah, my experience has been that people are totally aware. You know, the people without homes living outside, they're completely
Totally,
aware
yeah.
of the oppression and the income inequality. You know, people who are experiencing or suffering from disabilities, you know, have to go through the healthcare system, they're also very aware. Parents of children in schools that don't have enough resources are also totally aware.
And the kids are totally aware.
The kids are the most aware.
They know what they're not getting. They know they don't, the technology, they know there's something wrong. There's no question.
It's always evident when there's kids involved in sports and they go to other schools and they see the way that the other schools are built and the resources that they have. And also, you know, kids are more connected to technology and information than other people. And so we have a youth media program here. And they're the most woke people here at Philly
No
Cam.
doubt. Oh, yeah.
They really know. I guess I wanted to highlight that because it's, you know, I think that people are very aware no matter what their income or education level is.
Yeah, and Vanessa, you brought up a really good point, and I think this is a lesson I'd like people to take away from this conversation, is that it is incumbent on us not only to sort of inform people, but also for us to fan the conversations about what's really important moving forward in this society. So if you really think about it, forget the nonsense for a second, and you can become obsessed with it, and I follow it way too much. But and that exists, and we have to address it. But if you really think about it, and I don't care, frankly, what ideological perspective you come from. If we sat down here with 5 or 6 Philadelphians and had a conversation about really important, if you really think about it, what are the real conversations as a society we should be having? How do we deal? And I go back to this opioid piece just because it's all we're hearing in North Philly day in and day out, and it's impacting people, frankly, of all throughout the economic sphere. In suburban South Jersey, where I live, it's impacting all kind of people that make a lot more money than I do, and their children. And so, why aren't we having a real conversation in society about it? Why aren't we having a real conversation about bridging this economic this gap in income inequality? That could be led by the young people. This conversation about what our education system should be about. We still have an education system based on the farm schedule, where kids have off in the summer. We're not talking. We're not empowering. Why aren't we teaching every child how to code in this country? And these are the real questions. And what's wonderful about movements is that we can bring up these conversations. People weren't talking about income inequality till a few years ago. People weren't talking about the student loan crisis. People weren't talking about the opioid crisis, even though addiction has been in our communities for many years. So we can do that, but we have to push the real agenda that empowers real people in our community.
And one of the issues that I also wanted to touch on is our environment, and specifically what's happening at the EPA and at the federal level, the Environmental Protection Agency. And I'm trying to connect the dots here because so much of what's happening at the EPA in terms of rolling back environmental protections disproportionately affect people of color,
Absolutely.
indigenous communities, and people in urban areas. You are having an event coming up soon.
Yes. Yeah, so obviously if you're listening to this or watching this in Philadelphia, tomorrow, the UnidosUS Action Fund is hosting a forum at Concilio, one of our local community organizations, 141 East Hunting Park Avenue, starting at 11 o'clock. Free Spanish food. I repeat, a free Spanish lunch meal. So please stop by. And what we're going to be talking about is how do we engage Latinos and other Philadelphians in this conversation around the environment? You know, we're having this conversation every day about whether it's family members that have asthma, whether it's sort of the environment or the pollution that impacts your local community or neighborhood. But we often don't talk about it in those terms because we think the environment's sort of this sort of elite issue that others discuss. And so what we're trying to do is continue the conversation in our community around, first of all, seeing it for what it is as these environmental issues impacting and disproportionately impacting our community, but really raising awareness about what are some of the causes. And in this case, with the Trump administration, the Environmental Protection Agency has been a very, very bad actor that's impacted our community, that's creating more pollution and more of these challenges. Scott Pruitt, who was the former director of the EPA, got a lot of headlines for his incredibly unethical behavior, and that's what ultimately led to him being fired. But the problems that his agency wrought from a policy perspective are continuing. So we want to continue that conversation and discuss strategies how to mobilize people around those issues.
I think it's an important conversation to have. And one of the many issues, like we got to break it down one by one and also talk about it in conversational terms, but in specific, the specific ways that it's actually affecting us here locally. So if you're just tuning in, you're listening and watching to the People Power Lunch Hour here on Philly Cam TV and WPPM Community Radio. I'm your host, Vanessa Maria Graber. I'm speaking with Rafael Collazo, who is the political director of UnidosUS. We're talking about organizing the Latino community and all of its other relevant issues. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll talk more about the upcoming midterm elections. Thanks for listening.
Know your rights as a voter. In Philadelphia, you are entitled to a polling location that is completely accessible and free from political campaigning, one that offers language interpreters and provides provisional paper ballots. In the United States, only 25% of voter polling places are completely accessible. You can determine if your precinct is accessible by visiting philadelphiavotes.com. If your polling location is not accessible, you have the right to receive an alternative ballot, which, similarly to an absentee ballot, must be mailed to the County Board of Elections before November 6th. Your polling location will provide language access services, large print voting instructions and ballots, and volunteers to answer questions about voting procedures. If you encounter an issue at your polling place, call the Philadelphia County Board of Elections at 215-686-1590.
Welcome back to the People Power Lunch Hour show. I'm your host, Vanessa Maria Graber, and I'm here with my friend and comrade, Rafael Collazo. He's the political director of UnidosUS Action Fund, and we're talking about elections, voting, organizing our communities, and how we can talk about these issues in a way that makes sense and empowers people.
That's right.
So in the last segment of our show, I wanted to talk more specifically about the midterm elections. It's going to be huge. I mean, it's all everybody is talking about.
Right.
There's a lot of buildup. I want you to talk about what it means and what are the implications. What's your take on it?
You know, political nerds like me, every couple years go to a rally or something, and somebody gets on stage and says, you know what? This is the biggest election in our lifetime. I know I may have said that 2 years ago, but this one is the biggest election. But let me tell y'all something. This one is the biggest election of our lifetime, certainly the biggest midterm. And so even though President Trump's not on the ballot, essentially he is, because we have an opportunity to change the makeup of the House and Senate, two bodies, particularly the House, which have, I believe, have been treasonous. Their leadership has been treasonous to our country, and how they've allowed this president to be complicit in a variety of ethical and immoral policies and behaviors. And so we have to flip the script. And so midterms don't get a lot of interest. They're not real sexy. Most of these elected officials don't have a ton of charisma. You don't know who represents you when it comes to congressional districts. But let me see la verdad. The way my grandmother said, we got to make this happen. We have to come out and vote in November. It is indeed the most important midterm in our lifetimes.
I also want to talk about volunteerism because I think it's, again, related to community engagement. I really don't like the idea or the narrative that people are putting out that voting is the end-all, be-all. In fact, it takes thousands or millions of people to organize and volunteer before the election even takes place. Talk more about that.
Well, let me give you a very personal example. 2004, as a young lad, I ran for office myself, state representative. And one of the things that my mentors, and I was in San Antonio, Texas yesterday, my homie Andy Hernandez, one of my OGs, taught me many years ago, was that before you start campaigning and start asking people for the vote, You literally start with your family. And it was interesting what I found. What I found was when I started asking my family, cousins, friends, some people weren't registered to vote, not because they had any issue with voting. They just, no one ever asked them. They know how to do it. Some people weren't registered Democrats. Some people just didn't know I was running or just wanted me to ask them for their vote or engage them somehow. I had a question about my platform. So you're very right, is that, and we have to, even as volunteers, as social media activists, whatever it is, we have to start with ourselves and our immediate network. We have no idea how many people we can immediately impact in our sphere of influence that will listen to us, that trust us, as long as we give them accurate information to make their own decision. And so we have to start, if you want to work on a particular campaign, election for a particular candidate you feel passionate about, that's fantastic. And there's many ways you can plug into that. You can certainly volunteer with our organization if you don't want to work for a particular party or candidate. But just as importantly, before you even get into that, ask the 10, 20 people, loved ones in your life, if they're registered, and if they are, to make sure that they come out and vote. I don't care what state they live in. It is incredibly important they come out and vote this election.
Many people go into the voting booth and they pause because they don't recognize the names or the ballot initiative questions. How do we solve that problem?
Well, on some level, it certainly is the responsibility of elected officials to earn people's votes and go out there and campaign, and that's a whole other conversation. But as activists, I can say that, that is part of the reason why I encourage people to start with their network of friends, because I get it all the time. I get people, oh, who do I vote for, Ralph? It's not that they're not interested. They honestly just don't know who these people are. And just as importantly, they don't know what they've done for our community. So, it is important for us to have that information, to be able to empower them, to be able to just know basic things. What is the federal government sort of influence as opposed to state government or local government? Oftentimes people know what the president kind of is doing and maybe what the mayor's doing, but not really much in between. So as activists, we have to provide people that basic information. And with that basic civic engagement information, that will really give our friends a lot more confidence. I oftentimes find that people feel a little intimidated because they don't feel they know a lot about politics. They don't want to sound stupid in front of me because they think I know everything, or they think somebody's going to put them down for their opinion, or they may have a disagreement. But it's really important that we sort of engage people and just give them that basic information, give them the confidence to express themselves, ask more questions, and understand, why their vote matters.
I think there's also some personal responsibility in
That's right.
and putting in the work and time to educate yourself.
That's right.
A little while ago, we gave some information on our TV show all about how people can sort of learn about the issues here locally. A really great website and organization, Committee of 70,
Yes.
has all the candidates, all the ballot questions. That's a great place to start. But I would also encourage you, don't be afraid to learn about these issues and learn who the candidates are.
Let me tell you, if you Google any candidate, especially in this election cycle, we're talking about congressional races, Senate races, and the governor's race for the most part. All those people, you Google their website, their website's got all their platform policies. You can make your own decision about what you care about, what their track record is. You don't have to do a tremendous amount of research to find out what these candidates are about. And in the case of Pennsylvania, I want to give people a heads up, especially my Latinos. And I'm looking at Facebook, especially my Puerto Ricans in Pennsylvania that can make a very big difference in these elections, that the two Republican candidates, particularly the one running against Senator Bob Casey, our current Democratic senator, and Governor Tom Wolf, the two Republican candidates have based, particularly the Senate candidate Barletta, have based their political careers and their political platforms on anti-Latino racism. Mm-hmm. And so if you think it's bad now, do you want a senator and do you want a governor that literally, and you can Google it, that call Puerto Rico, visiting Puerto Rico or supporting Puerto Rico BS, and I'm being nice about how I'm saying it, or literally say that the problem with Pennsylvania are Latino immigrants moving into places like Hazleton, Pennsylvania, or South Philadelphia. So, if you once you educate yourself, the choices are going to be very clear to you. And if you don't think, just because you think, and again, I'm talking about people on Facebook, you got a house in Northeast Philly and you think life is great, your children could have been some of those children separated that are now living in tent cities on our southern border. And so there's a lot of issues we need to deal with and be real about and understand that if we don't stop this madness now, that madness could get to your doorstep any day.
Yeah, I also want to point out a big senatorial race in New Jersey where a Latino candidate is up for re-election.
Yes, he
That's
is.
Senator Bob Menendez. we saw how narrow the Supreme Court vote was. How important is it?
Well,
You
the
know,
current Senate makeup is as you said, is 51-49. So, and the long and short of it is that every Democratic vote counts, and there is an opportunity potentially to flip the Senate, particularly in states like Florida and the Southwest. And so we've been pushing hard in those areas, particularly our Florida Latino voters. Very important election down there as well. But in the case of Senator Menendez, there's a lot of negative ads you may see on Comcast or basic cable about his apparent ethical issues. The bottom line is all that got thrown out of court. Nothing was, nothing stuck in that sense. And Senator Menendez, if you don't pay a lot of attention and don't just watch basic headlines or negative ads, has been a great champion for working people across the board, to the point where the UnidosUS Action Fund and our president, Janet Murguia, traveled to New Jersey. I was in Brick City, Newark, New Jersey. You ever go to Brick City, Vanessa?
I have
Newark?
not. I've been to,
Oh, my God. Great
Newark. I've been to Newark.
Food town. Great food town. I love Newark. Brick City, much respect. Home of Red Man and others. But long story short, we had an event recently with a group of other Latina powerful leaders from the Lupe PAC to endorse Senator Menendez because we feel so strongly we need his voice as a champion for working people and all Latinos in the U.S. Senate. So a lot of important elections coming up throughout the region.
I want to end with, which I think is something that's really, really important, something that's really special and close to my heart, is the mobilization of women. Talk
Absolutely.
more about
Well,
the women that have been really engaged.
What I like to tell people is I've had a Latina boss my whole life between my mother and my wife, and I came out damn good. So let me tell you something. When it comes, particularly, you could even say this as a nation. The future of our country and our leadership is women. We got to get rid of all these knucklehead guys that are up there. Women are tremendous advocates and organizers. They're the dominant, from a Latino context, they're the dominant leadership in our country. And from an activist class, easily 70-80% of the people that are doing the real work on the ground in our communities are Latinas. And so
thank you for saying that, because
there's no question.
I
It's
feel
clear.
like a lot of the credit sometimes doesn't go
You guys
to
y'all
women.
get very little credit, and y'all deserve almost all the credit. And I'm the first to say it. I call like I see it. And that's why I was so excited to do this work in New Jersey with the Lupe PAC. It is a group of powerful Latinas, very inclusive, very diverse, and they come together to support each other. And I think oftentimes I hear from women like yourself, Vanessa, that they're just looking for networks of other women to be unified with and be empowered. So to the extent I can be helpful facilitating that, I like to. But the bottom line is that when it comes to the issues we care about, the woman as the center of the household or the center of public opinion in her home is a dominant factor. And so that's why healthcare and these family issues are such dominant themes when we network and outreach to our community. So we just have to, again, empower the women in our community to have a voice, have platforms, have leadership, and empower people like you, Vanessa, to build this show and even extend your audience.
All right. Well, we're going to end it on that note. I want to thank Rafael Collazo. He's the political director from the UnidosUS Action Fund. Tell them where they can find more information on your website.
Absolutely. UnidosUS Action Fund is UnidosUSAF, as if AF.org. So UnidosUSAF.org. UnidosUSAF on all our social media platforms, Instagram, Twitter. And then you can reach out to me. My Twitter handle is at Collazo Philly, and Instagram is at Raise Latino Talk. We keep talking. It don't end here. Let me tell you, when this goes off, we're going to keep it going.
All right. I want to thank you so much for coming and contributing. Again, I want to reiterate the importance of getting involved some way, somehow in your communities by volunteering, by educating yourself, and by spreading the word. Thank you so much for watching and listening. That's going to do it for this episode of the People Power Lunch Hour Show. We'll see you again in 2 weeks, where we'll continue the conversation on elections and voting. If you would like to see this episode and all of our episodes of the People Power Lunch Hour, you can visit our website at phillycam.org. All right. Thank you.
Peace.
You're listening to WPPM LP Philadelphia.